Thanks, Chuck. All right, we will begin our Building, Zoning, and Development Committee meeting this evening at 7:58 p.m. Present are committee members Williamson, Limpert, and Schuman. Our council president, Councilman Brossard, Glassburn, and Kelly. The mayor, law director, our finance director, our human resources director, our planning director, and guests. On the agenda for this evening is a continuation of our discussion on ordinance numbers 2020-78 and 79, which read 78 is an ordinance providing for the amendment of chapter 1115, definitions of the codified ordinances of the city of North Olmsted as amended, as well as 2020-79, which is an ordinance providing for the replacement of chapter 1163 signs of the codified ordinances of the city of North Olmsted as amended. I know that each of us were provided with the new attachments, the new exhibits, I should say, for these pieces after our discussion last week. I don't know if the committee has any questions regarding these changes, or if you've identified something that wasn't included. Seeing nothing from Mr. Limpert or Mr. Schuman. Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you for your deliberate and thorough review of this topic. So there were two areas that I wasn't sure if were deliberately not changed or not. One was in the temporary, and I may just have missed, was the off discussed items regarding vehicle signs. I didn't see that exception in there if that was intended.
Thank you, Mr. Glassburn, because I did notice that myself. With the attachment, Director Lieber, I know that Mr. Glassburn's correct. We did discuss adding a number 5 vehicle signs to that temporary COVID policy, but that was not listed.
Madam Chair, my understanding from the committee and with the other committee participants was that once we amended the section on temporary signs that allowed for time-limited vehicle signs, that does allow for vehicle signs, and I did not glean that the other committee members wanted all temporary signs to be permitted all the time. They could correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that they were satisfied with amending that later temporary sign section, and that would allow for some vehicle signage. So that was my interpretation of what the committee had recommended, but if it's not, we can change it.
We had talked about putting the stipulation that the vehicles were registered and licensed as a way to cover, but yeah, I believe that we did vote in to put the vehicle signs. I don't think Mr. Limpert was in favor of that, but Mr. Schuman had gone along with it as well during our vote.
That's an easy change.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Glassburn, you may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The second area, and this may verge on more of a policy discussion, is the question of the residential districts amendment offered by Councilman Schuman. I was hopeful that we were going to at least have an option or two to further refine that or consider to have that be less of a blunt instrument. If that's not the case, I'll try to come up with an alternative. I'm not wholly unsympathetic to the idea of having some kind of differential for residential, but I do want to note that there, aside from this amendment, was already a differential in that residential areas could only have a brightness of 150 nits, which I looked up. 300 nits would be your typical flat screen TV in terms of brightness, which is the standard for everywhere else. So we have a differentiation that half as bright already for residential. So again, I think that might actually already address, and I'd rather not use as blunt of an instrument for language. But anyway, I've made my point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is there, Mr. Limpert, but I wanted to ask, is there any change that we need to discuss, Director, or?
I mean, this is really up to committee. Committee had voted on that amendment as written, and if committee wants to change their mind, but I think the language as written achieves what the person offering the amendment wanted to achieve. So I guess I wouldn't recommend changes to language unless you're just considering going in a different direction with that section.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Limpert?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that we did vote on that, and you know, I essentially, when you say prohibited, then nothing, in my opinion, a variance board's never going to allow one of those signs when the language says prohibited. So that's my only argument, is that we mentioned there's a variance process, which in my opinion, that language says that a variance will ultimately be denied since it's prohibited. So, but we did already vote on that, and I did not win that vote, so it's in there as appropriate. Thanks.
Are there any additional comments, suggestions from committee members regarding the two pieces that we have received tonight? All right, seeing none, I will go back to Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My last point of the evening would be, I think it's just in a disagreement, and I think I'd like the opportunity to vote on when we get to the full body, which is the question of the frequency of the changing messages. I still think it's just impossible to reconcile that we can say it's safe to have a message changing every 15 seconds at City Hall and then set the standard at once a day for everyone else. I mean, even if a restaurant had a sign like this that offers breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they can't change for, you know, the different time of day of the meals. So again, maybe 15 seconds or 10 seconds that we afford ourselves may be too generous for the rest of the city, and I'm fine with starting conservatively, but I think there's a wide difference between once a day and once every 15 seconds, and I'd rather us give the businesses of our community the same opportunities that we give ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glassburn. Mr. Schuman, or I'm sorry, Mr. Limpert.
Yeah, on that, I'd be more in favor of us just creating a policy that we don't change our sign as much and try to align in good faith with what we're expecting. I know we don't have to, as Ms. Lieber stated, but to me, that's a better approach than just because we've done that in the past. Everyone else, you know, we should do it that way for everyone else. To me, and then my only other concern is that it's going to be hard to enforce on a certain time period otherwise, unless you stipulate it needs to be changed at this time, that time, and that time. So that would be my approach if there's concern about the City Hall sign being different than what the sign ordinance says for the commercial. Thanks.
Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a question regarding this section. Director Lieber, so does this also apply to drive-through electronic signs? Like, for example, if I'm going through a fast food drive-through and they, you know, their board sometimes changes depending on like specials that they're offering, or like certain times of day, you know, they have different offerings. Thank you.
That's a good question. And my interpretation is that the limit on the changeable was in the section on ground signs, and that later when we talk about menu boards, that restriction is not listed in that location. I guess precisely for the reason that, you know, sometimes menus can be large and you don't want to have enough area or square footage that might be needed for, a business's entire menu. So I take that prohibition on changeable to be for the ground sign that's permitted to have a certain sign face of electronic message center, and not for the drive-through facility signage.
Thank you.
Thank you. To my committee members, would it be the pleasure of the committee to make any change regarding the signs and the amount of time that they change, or restricting anything else? Mr. Schuman.
I think we've already talked this thing out. I mean, we've already voted on it, so.
I know, but I want to vet this through to make sure that, we're all still here on the same page, and maybe to address any other concerns that our other colleagues may have. Mr. Limpert?
Yeah. I guess my question would be on enforcement of the sign changing. I mean, it would be, you would just have to go back and somebody would inspect the sign and take a picture and then see if it changes. I would assume that violators would be doing this on a consistent basis. So there'd be a reported claim, and then somebody would go out and see if the sign changes more regular than once a day in order to issue a citation. Is that how this would go? And that's probably to Ms. Lieber.
Yes, there's always an investigation and documentation, but the first thing we do before any citation is just to communicate with the business owner about what the rules are and seek voluntary compliance.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Limpert. Are there any additional questions, comments, concerns from a committee? Any council? Questions, concerns? Okay. Then seeing none, I will make a motion to recommend 2020-78 as amended. And I believe that was amended to remove the flag definition. So make a motion to recommend approval to all of council for that ordinance as amended, and ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Limpert. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that motion passes with a vote of 3-0. As far as 2020-79, Director Garreau, do I need to go through all of these changes that were made, or am I good to go with just one motion to amend?
No, you can do that. You're just going to make a motion to recommend approval with amendments as recommended by the committee, and those amendments. Then when you do the report out on the floor, then you can be detailed about what the specific amendments were.
Okay, thank you.
Fine. Motion. Fine.
Thank you. Okay, so then I will make a motion then to recommend approval to all of council for ordinance 2020-79 as amended, and ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Limpert. All in favor, say aye.
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 And that motion passes with a vote of 3-0. Our meeting is concluded at 8:12 p.m.